All right, welcome back to the Strength Starts Here podcast. Troy Shanks.
Episode 6?
And it's episode 6, yeah. I think we want to just kind of overview all these deaths that have been happening in the bodybuilding strength world. Bodybuilding in specific.
Yeah.
But, what's the cause? Why are we seeing so many? Are we really seeing any more than we saw or heard about 20 years ago, 10 years ago? And kind of break that down a little bit in our perspectives, kind of how I see it, Back in the early days of bodybuilding, guys were, Arnold was 30 when he won his 7th Olympia. I'm 37 and I'm not even a pro yet. We got guys well into their 30s before that, and have been working hard at it for 10 or 15 years before they even get to that pro level. And then when they're at that level, then they're like, well, now we need to make some money back from this whole career of putting everything into it, right? So they want to go another 8 to 10 years. So now, the old school days, you were, pushing, being a bodybuilder, maybe using PEDs for 10 years, 15 years. Now we're pushing it almost twice that length. Not only that, Arnold was 225 on stage as Mr. Olympia. Ramy was 298.
Right.
So we have like 5 things going here. We got size of body, whether it's fat or muscle, doesn't matter. More weight on a human being is harder on the body. My brothers that are my height are 165 pounds. I walk around off season 270, 275. That's 100 pounds more, and for how many years, right? Not necessarily healthy. We might look good on the outside, but are we really healthy individuals?
A lot of stress on the organs.
Right.
And the heart, yeah.
Not only that, as you're bigger, what does that mean? You got to fuel the machine. So now we're taxing our digestive systems a lot harder. We're eating 6 times a day. I eat religiously 6 times a day, plus shakes for training and right when I wake up. So 6 to 10 times a day for a lot of us. We're intaking stuff. That's the metabolism is constantly working. Your digestive tract is constantly in process working. It's not really resting as much as, the guys in the old would do. 4 or 5 meals a day, 100 pounds lighter in body weight, not lifting near as much. Arnold, I think we saw him do a 500-pound squat, maybe 500-pound deadlifts. Wasn't much more than that. He had a good bench too. It was probably in the 450s too. Well, now, we got guys in our gym that are pushing 900-pound deadlifts. We got guys that are benching in the 5s, and squatting in the 8s, 7s, and 8s, and not just a couple guys, but a handful of them. There's a lot more dudes. So, bigger in body, duration of taking substances, constantly in and out of diets, so digestive system. Probably the 3 biggest things that I see being why that we might be seeing, and then genetics always play a part of it, but that's constant in all life.
Right.
It's constant back then as it is now. Genetics play a role. If you're predisposed, you start taking PEDs. You might not ever have that issue, but it might uncover it when you get on gear, let's say, and it could bring up some of those things that you might have been in your family. Maybe you don't even know yet, but you're uncovering it now because we're doing something that's extra physiological, right? What else? But yeah, I think it's duration. When a kid that's 20 years old, and now we have social media too, that's so much more in your face than it was when I started. We barely had the internet.
Yeah.
You had to read books still. It was very hard to navigate online. It was dial-up at best. You weren't getting on there for a long period of time to figure stuff out. It was MySpace, back then. So now with Instagram daily, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, guys are staying in shape longer too. So is that unhealthy as well, right? Old school bodybuilders, they could go off season for 3-4 months. You don't see them. They get fat and happy. Probably backing off of the gear at that point because they don't have to necessarily stay in as conditioned a state that maybe sponsorships want you to be in now, right? You're your face. And there's a healthy way to do either or. But just constantly being too lean all the time, and that can be hard in your system as well, right?
Yeah, because back in the day they would do what, like a qualifier, and then they would do the Olympia, or 2 to 3 a year probably. And some of these bodybuilders now are 5 to 6 a year. I've heard of a couple of them that are just doing month after month, trying to get enough points to qualify, or whatever the purpose is, trying to get their pro card.
There was a couple of dudes in the open men's bodybuilding that made it on points, and they competed 6 or 7 times each that year.
Yeah. So now you're running those, the diuretics, the fat burners, and all the other gear that you're trying to run. It's putting a lot of extra stress on your body. Plus, right, you're lifting just the same, but all year, whereas opposed to yesteryear of Arnold and Franco and them, maybe a couple times.
Yeah.
And they weren't as lean, and they weren't pounding the food like you said, right? And
We're probably traveling more too, so your diet's really messed up when you're traveling. If you're traveling and doing 6 or 7 shows a year, maybe not all of them are in the U.S. Maybe you're flying out of country.
right.
That's hard on a body as well. And while you're doing all that, you're in a calorie deficit to a certain degree. You're not in a surplus, which makes your body gives your body that extra little cushion, that padding, to be able to stay up an extra hour, to be able to go do a photo shoot, to be able to hit training a little extra hard.
Right.
You're still doing all that, but now you're in a deficit. Now you're traveling. Now you've added all these extra stresses on the body. Social media constantly being on there to show face. And, also with the social media side of things, younger individuals seem to be getting on PEDs and gear way before the time they should.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
With that being said, what would you say if someone was to come to you and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think?" What age? What's your age, like minimum age that you would?
I have a minimum number that I've always said is 24, 25.
Yep, that's mine too.
But that is in context. If you can't freaking do a 15-pound dumbbell curl as a male,
Just
at
because you're
6 foot
25 doesn't
tall,
mean you get a blast.
Yeah. What are you doing? So I don't think, and I don't think age is the good qualifier to when you should start and when you shouldn't. Now, if you've been doing sports in high school, you've been weightlifting in high school, 14, 15 years old, you've been hitting the gym pretty religiously 4 or 5 days a week for 10 years, that's more of a, okay, has this guy gone through to become an adult-sized dude? Has he lifted consistently enough for 10,000 reps, let's say? Let's say 10 years equals about 10,000 reps in each body part. And he's been feeding it, and he's been growing, and he's been progressing every year, and now he's getting to the point where he's like plateauing out. It's just very, very hard to make that next thing. That might be a time when a guy can entertain that, but does it mean it's the right call for everyone? Absolutely not. I mean, if a dude doesn't have the potential in a short amount of time, in my experience, to do anything on a professional level, any sport, if he's going to add, a super physiological dose of testosterone or any sort of PEDs, he needs to have an end game in mind with it, because the risk ratio is just not worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're really being honest with ourselves, me and you included,
Yeah.
Duration of time, how big we are, how much we stress our bodies out by how much we lift, on top of doing the events and the shows and the food and everything else, that's taking years off of our life every single
absolutely.
day. And you can slow it down at some point, but you'll never get it back. It's gone once you start, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a small cycle here and there, you did 3 throughout your course of your life, is it going to affect a guy much? It absolutely could.
Yeah.
Probably not.
But is there a benefit to that?
Is there a benefit if you're just a recreational dude coming in to lift to stay fit for your family, to go play a softball game with the boys, or the families on the weekends? You're wasting your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally years off your life. It's a value you can't even put a price tag on, really.
Yep. And I think that is one of the things is people, like you said, start earlier now.
They do. I mean, it's got to be a factor.
17, 18-year-olds, getting into, and one, the long-term effects at that point, you're shutting your productions down early on anyway. but your body hasn't even taken you to its peak that it could do for you, right? So now you're putting those extra stresses. You're weakening your tendons. You're doing all these other things that nobody thinks about, but they're after that short-term goal.
And then, going into that, what do you think? What do you think is an age if a dude was lifting at 14 or 15 in high school? What do you think the age is when he reaches a muscle maturity to where that is really him maxing out his potential? I mean, that's asking how long a rope is.
Yeah.
But, I mean...
I think it's different for everybody.
It's different for everybody. And that's why I say that age of 24, 25 isn't a great, denominator for it. But if he was a serious lifter, really wanting to be a bodybuilder or a strongman or a powerlifter, and he put everything in every single week, stacked it consistently, he's going to see growth.
Yeah.
And after 10 years, it's probably going to plateau. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in that 8 to 12 years, you're going to plateau probably. Yeah. That's why I've made that. But if you were just talking about a normal dude, I'm thinking 34. Honestly, I'm thinking in your 30s is probably where, because I don't really feel like you get your man strength. Well, I don't even think you really get your man strength until you're 28, 29, 30. Man, when I hit 31, I went from like struggle busting 315 on bench to repping 405s. Right. You know what I mean? So. And I didn't change anything, but I ate a little bit more. I just, everything changes. Yeah.
So I think the 24, 25 for me also, when people are like, oh, what do you... Before that age, I don't think they fully grasp, and there are some, obviously, can grasp the concept of the long-term effects of it.
Right.
Right? And I think at 24, 25, you have a little bit more... ability to make those risk decisions than you would at 18 or 19. Well, because at 18 or 19 I want to get big, I want to get fast, whatever it is. At 25 you're like, okay, well I want all these things, but at what cost?
But being mid-30s now and you were to look back, did you really give a fuck at 18 or 25 what you were doing? If you were going to go, because we're crazy.
No, I was dumb enough to try it at 21.
Right.
Right, because...
And I think I started earlier. And it was very small, but I was 18, Yeah. See, being a crazy motherfucker, like in this world that we're in, we do crazy stuff. I mean, we eat an astronomical amount. We lift, we walk places, people are like, that's a freak. Like someone who's tattooed from the face to their toes. You're like, that's how people look at us sometimes, right? We're just way out of the norm, right? And what is the reason for that? Well, there could be 100 reasons for that, but we love to do it. It's our reason why we do it. Now, and this is what I was prefacing here is, I had a physique that looked good at a young age, and I was able to win national level shows, and as the teen. The top of what you could be at that age. That doesn't mean that everybody can do that. Right. And it doesn't, that's a very rare thing that happens. It's a small percentage, it's less than 1%, right? That can fit into that super, but you're going to have a lot of people that try to get to that level.
Well, I was going to say, but everybody thinks that if you add a little extra,
right,
you'll be able to get there quicker or whatnot, right? But not always the case. And I think that's the biggest thing that, people, and not to say that all these athletes that have passed didn't take these into consideration. Many of them did, right? And many of them know the risks. Just like on, you got these retired NFL players and they've got all these issues. Well, I'm sorry, but you knew the risk when you started in middle school. And the science came out along your career, and, now you're suffering those. These bodybuilders, alive or past, are, they have to make that decision. And if you're trying to get to the pinnacle of your sport, what's it worth to you? What risks are you willing to take? And I think the problem that happens to all of us, right, is that, well, it's not going to happen to me. That won't be me,
because I'm Superman.
Exactly. Yeah. In our own minds, because you can rep 405 on the bench. I'm different than them, right? Well, no, at the end of the day, we're all going to crumble, right? So I think that, the younger generation's coming into it, and even if, a 35-year-old, the risks that you're taking, you have to understand them and know that they are real risks. That way, if you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, hey, man, sorry, you're on the decline now, you're not surprised.
Yeah, to kind of go back and touch on a couple other things that I don't think people, the information, there's so much misinformation.
Oh, yes.
But also, compared to 20 years ago, there is information. 20 years ago, it was hard. There was like 2 books that you could read.
Yeah.
And they're about this thick.
Pick you up a muscular development. And see
Yeah. I'm talking about that were strictly for
right.
ped use. I think it was called the Anabolic Primer or something. It was a small little book. And even that didn't really go into depth. It was very little information. Now you actually can find there's some really good sources out there that will tell you exactly what each compound can do, exactly how it affects the body, exactly how and where you will have side effects or not. Right. And I think a lot of these younger kids nowadays don't understand that one cycle can screw up their sex drive and the way their own body works for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen to all, but it does happen. So I wasn't affected with anything at all until way into my mid-30s.
Right.
But I also was pretty smart about it, and I learned along the way, right?
Yeah.
You know, like you said, when we first started, we're like, oh, I take a little bit more, that's going to be better. Not necessarily the case, right? And usually it's not.
I'd say 9 times out of 10 it's not.
No, exactly. Exactly.
More is not always better.
No. I mean, I use the analogy all the time. There's only a certain amount of growth that you can do in a window.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much you eat, how much you train, how much you sleep. You're still maxed out at how much you can accomplish in X amount of time. So doing double doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go double. You might have 10 times the side effects, though, and 10 times the breakdown. What were you going to say earlier? I cut you off.
Well, no, you're just the fact that, you know, these the risks are there, right? So and then we're talking about these bodybuilders that have passed on. They all passed from a different issue, right?
Right.
And the speculation is that it's all gear related,
right?
Which is another common misconception. So you got 2 sides of it, right? Like, you know, if you have this misconception that it's gear related, then when a bodybuilder passes, you know, then it must be that, or you know, even on the mental side of it, right? If a bodybuilder's taking his own life, well, it must have been the steroids. So there's other facets to it, you know. So I don't want to blame like these deaths, you know, on gear by themselves, but you know, psychologically it does affect you. Yeah. Physiologically, it does affect you. You know, like you said earlier, we're bigger, we're pushing more weight, we're pushing more food. Our blood pressure's higher these days, right? And then you're adding these compounds that are, you know, thickening the walls of your heart. They're, you know, tearing up your kidneys. They're, you know, and then all the protein they were eating too. So you're double whammy on it.
Just the training itself is breaking down the kidneys.
You know, and I think...
keep going. I'm just off this film.
I think that if people were to fully understand these risks going into it, I think that maybe we could combat a lot of the issues, you know, because I've known some younger people that, you know, now they have these issues, you know, because of prior use. Could they have been avoided? Who knows, right? Like maybe that was their path anyway. Maybe a heart attack at 35 was their path anyway, you know.
Tends to be more uncommon.
Right, you know, and for those reasons earlier, right, you're staying leaner longer, you know. I correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these deaths were around showtime, right? They were into contest prep.
Not all of them. I mean,
not all.
Not even a considerable amount because they're competitive bodybuilders, so they're competing sometime in that year.
Yeah.
So how far off season to on season? I mean, one of them for a fact was a couple days before a show. So there's just so many factors that I think the eyes from the outside look at. Oh, it's steroids.
Yeah.
Does it absolutely have a part of the pie? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But size of human, the amount of work that we put into our training, the amount of intense cardio you do, these are all hard on the body organs. The heart is a muscle. It grows just as much as the outside. It'll grow just as much on the inside. And then eventually, there's only so much space in your shell that it can grow, and then all of a sudden, it can't go anywhere else.
Yep, so now you're pushing on walls, yep.
So you're becoming a freak in a way, right? Inside and out. The best case scenario is you do die young and you die clean. Because what happens when you're 45 years old and now you have to go in for dialysis 3 times a week?
Right.
Because shit went bad, right? Is there ever a safe time? Is there ever a good time to do testosterone? To add that into your life, you know? Man, until you're 35 years old, 32, 35 years old, probably not for the average dude. You know, get your blood work done. If all of a sudden you start having that low sex drive, or you're just feeling like crap, or you turn into a blob, but you're still training and eating properly.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe it's time to go meet with a doc and get your blood work done and see if you need to bring your levels up to a normal level.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is ever really a safe time to ever do any sort of extracurriculars. And this is coming from a dude that competes and does use them.
Right.
I just don't think it's safe, you know.
And then you add these TRT doses, right? Well, testosterone has a direct correlation with enlarged prostate, right? So now if we're up in that, you know, even if you're doing it the safe route,
right,
it's still not scot-free.
Right.
You know, and
because human nature, you were supposed to do that naturally.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and we're just like, no, I'm not ready to get old yet.
Right.
So let's just go a little longer.
So I think the best case is that you'd set up everything financially for your loved ones, and then you died young.
Yeah.
The worst case, and it's probably going to happen to most people, is they're going to have some underlying side effect that they got to live with for the rest of their life. Whether it's, what did you mention earlier?
Prostate?
Yeah, well, the prostate from having too much,
Kidneys.
right? Kidneys from just dieting all the time, and just the constant breakdown of the muscle.
Yep.
Without PEDs, if you're a hardcore, I mean, you've heard of marathon runners falling dead at the end of a marathon. Yep. Their heart couldn't handle the intensity, right?
Yeah.
And that's just their heart. But the constant muscle breakdown from training and repair, your kidneys are filtering all of that all the time. And now you're giving yourself 3 times the amount of protein that a human should consume, daily, 4 years on end, So these are just those things that guys need and gals need to be aware of whenever making this decision. And there's not enough time to do enough research, in my opinion.
No, and good, honest research too, right? I hate when people, come to me and they, oh, well, I read on this forum that, if I do this and that and, I have this. You can't trust those kinds of sites, right? Like it's like in school when we used to, have to do a research paper, no Wikipedia, because it's bunk. It's bunk information.
Yeah.
So don't go on a bodybuilding forum and take it because some guy out in, I don't know, New Hampshire said that this is what you should do, and now you're doing 1,200 milligrams of test on top of 1,000 milligrams of tren or whatever,
Well,
at a 18-year-old, 175-pound dude.
Or a 47-year-old.
Yeah.
That doesn't even train 3 days a week, or put the food work in or the cardio. And so there's so much misinformation out there. We will put at the bottom of this description a couple of links to some YouTube docs that are devoted their life to this.
Yeah.
One of them is the Anabolic doc on YouTube. Dr. Tom O'Connell. He's awesome.
What I like about his too on that is that he does explain the risks, right? Like he does these case studies
in depth for 10 years now on these guys, dealing with guys that have been on for 20 years, 30 years, crazy ridiculous stuff, and just showing what they have to do to reverse that so he can live the rest of his life with his kids even.
Yep.
So he does some crazy studies, but he's really dedicated his life to this, and he's a good source. So there's a lot of misinformation. Well, what's the good information? I found that guy, and I think there's another one that I'll try to find. I can't think of it right off the top of my head. Other than that, you're getting a lot of bro science, and we got to kind of pull back the bro science because there's so many kids that are like, well, Joe at the gym said X, and Bobby said this. So, yeah, I need 1,200 milligrams of tren this week.
Right. Yeah, how do we get
You're
there?
155 pounds.
Yeah.
Where are you coming up with this? Do you have any concept? So, proper guidance from a good coach does help if you do make that decision to go down this road in any sport.
And not a coach that just started. If they've done one show, they probably don't understand, right? If they're 20 years old themselves and they've done one show, they probably don't understand the long-term effects. But a coach that's, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, has been bodybuilding for 20, 30 years.
Maybe one that's been at high-level shows
Right.
and has been doing this for a career.
Yep.
Because he's going to say very similar things to what we're talking about the risks
Right.
and the side effects and the blood work that needs to be done on and off cycle.
Yeah.
All these little things that, we've both been through frequently and recently, just to make sure we're in check. And then also having an end game to this. After there's only a certain amount of time you're going to be able to do this. If you want to call it healthy, you can. And it might not even be healthy at that matter.
Yeah.
But there's only a certain amount of time. What are you going to do after that? What's the life look like the last 30 years, 40 years of your life? What are you planning on then?
Yep.
So, the people always blame, they always want to blame one thing.
And
It's
unfortunately, in
not-
our sports, right, it's the steroids. It's not.
And this is what also blows my mind, too, because I would argue that there's 9 out of 10 football players that are on some sort of enhancement.
Oh, I'm sure.
And probably baseball and probably basketball, in one way or the other, these guys are on something. They might, I don't know what to say about that. I think all of them do. If you're a professional, we even saw Lance Armstrong being stripped of all of his titles. Would he still won without all that stuff? Who knows? He was an outstanding individual, so you can't just blame one thing. There's way too many factors. Maybe for one, testosterone would be a bigger slice of the pie. Maybe for another, it's smaller, and maybe it's genetics that's the bigger slice that'll kill you.
Yep. Maybe it was all the chicken that got him in.
Yeah.
Who knows? But like you were saying earlier, you have these marathon runners that, not a lot, but a good, in the past, majority of, number of them have died. Well, that's not a sport that's heavy on steroids.
Right.
So they don't get blamed for that. But if you got, a strength athlete or, a bodybuilder, a little bit more prevalent in the sport, that's the first thing to blame.
Right.
Not the fact that he's 5'8", 300 pounds.
Right.
Not the fact that he's, yoke walking, 1,500 pounds. Those aren't the issues.
Or 6'2", 440.
Yeah. Those aren't the issues. It's got to be this one thing.
Right.
And that's that even goes into even into the wrestling world, right? WWE and the professional wrestling.
Or
They get blamed straight. That was the first
UFC.
thing. Yeah. So you got to have that. People have to have a blame. They have to have something to blame. And whether if that's, how they find their closure or whatever it is, they got to have a blame.
Right. We've all done it with something in our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it was
that
this.
should happen because of X. It's like, well, maybe it was because of this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing, going forward with these athletes is that they have to understand the risks and they have to be okay with those risks. And if they're okay with those risks, do that research, from reputable sources,
Talking to the older dudes in the sport that have been in it 20 years. I might not have been, I'm not a pro yet, but, there was a lot of my life where I still lifted and still did this, but I was doing another profession at the time.
Right.
Now but I've been in it for 20 plus years.
Yep.
I've been lifting since I was 12 years old, pretty religiously.
Well, and you got, in that time frame, you make, friends and acquaintances that run into these issues, so you can kind of, well, why did you have this issue? Well, I didn't have this issue until I started running, EQ, whatever it is, right? So knowing from that experience, books are great, but that experience, from others is the best place to get that.
And I think one thing that we could take away from this too is, and it goes back to kind of the social media influence that we have, and just the societal pull today, is everything's right now. Just because you're going to take 5 times doesn't mean it's going to happen right now. Listen to what we've been saying this whole time.
Yep.
10 to 20 years.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes these guys 10 years to get to a professional level. And then at that point in time, they're like, well, crap, now I need to make some money. And that's if you're fast tracking. Let's just take Nick Walker, for example. He's 27 right now. This is 8 or 9 years in.
Yeah.
Granted, and that's a fast track.
I think his first show was 17, wasn't it?
Well, he's
Gear
been
probably
body.
not,
Well,
yeah.
I'm just saying bodybuilding in general.
Yeah.
From when he stepped on stage his first time at 16 or 17
Yeah.
to now, it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
And he's probably been pushing it pretty hard. But it's 10 years, guys. It's 10 years to
Yeah.
get to where he's at, and that's fast tracking. I mean, that's an anomaly. That's a guy that looks like, well, you said 17 or 18.
Yeah.
Overnight pro.
Yeah.
Over 10 years. It's just all of a sudden you see
He got
them.
it. He got his pro card one night.
Right.
But it wasn't,
Right.
the first night. Yeah. No.
So shit takes a long time, man, and you got to be patient with it. And coming in to want to win your first local show, that's a great goal to have.
Yeah.
If you don't, keep going, man.
Yeah.
There's the next one 6 months from now, 3 months from now, next year from now. Don't worry about it so much. Just spend the time being consistent, doing the research, getting yourself around the right people, the right group of people, having the right coach. I think the underlying correct, right, good, qualified coach is the key there. You get a qualified coach, not the first timers, not the young bucks. I mean, are there some young coaches? Yes, that are good.
Sure.
But in general, they're get the guys that have been doing it for a while and have seen and have lived through it like I have and you have. Doing it the wrong way, doing it the right way, seeing what works, and then you know what? There's still not enough research out there on all these things. You're gonna have to do a certain amount of playing with yourself anyway, because everyone responds a little different. There's certain things you probably can't take. There's certain things I can't take for X, Y, or Z. But this is what works, and there's a general line that guys can follow through with. But it's still kind of a trial and error. You're your own little science project. So it's a real nothing to rush into.
Well, right.
There's nothing to rush into here. You got your whole life, worst case scenario, you'll need to take a little bit when you're in your 30s to 40s just to bring your energy back up to a normal level.
Right.
And like you said, there's still side effects to that.
Yeah. And, that, right, like to be, quote a cliche, quote, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right.
That overnight success that society's after, that instant gratification, well, I popped, 2 Anavar, why am I not huge? It's not how it works, So having that understanding, I think if you go into it with that understanding, you won't push it so hard, because maybe you can do this small dose over the course of your lifetime. But it's those big doses that are exacerbating the issues that are shortening your lifespan exponentially more, right? So, and, again, we were talking about why is it happening more so now than yesteryear? Is it because...
I think it's time.
Yeah?
It's duration.
Not the quality?
The quality of
substances? I think back then they probably, fewer sources, probably a little bit more quality controlled maybe, less bathtub.
I mean, if you're getting it from a black market source, then there's always that issue. There could be always that issue. So that could be an issue. Yeah. I haven't had to deal with too much of that. I think everything to me really, the more I think about it, the more I've thought about it the past couple of weeks, the more I live it, I think it's just duration, man. There's only so much. I mean, how long can you run a tank out of gas? You know what I mean? How many miles are you given in that one vehicle? In this body, how many miles are we given? How hard can we pull a trailer? How hard can we lift? How hard can we do it till the body just goes, that was it,
yeah,
bro.
Once you start putting that octane boost in the tank, right?
On top of it,
that rod's coming out the side someday.
So that's a great example. Did you build your block to throw NOS on it? You know, did you spend the 10 years building that base? Did you put the consistency in it and work out every other aspect of that goal besides the ped? If you're wanting to blame it just on the peds, because you're going to find out you're going to have injuries, you're going to have to eat, you're going to have to train and do cardio, regardless if you add any substances along the way.
Right. And I think that that aspect of it does also follow last podcast about all the things that you should be doing outside the gym.
Right.
Well, let's get those in order before you add that octane booster.
Right.
You know, before you start to take that risk, because with the proper diet, the proper sleep, the recovery, all those things,
The
right?
mindset.
The mindset. You know, if you go into it with the wrong mindset, you know, we've known some people that
You get a little crazy.
Doesn't go the right way for them.
Right. Yeah.
So you got to have those things in order before you throw that booster in there, to ensure that you can handle it. Your body is primed and, you know, ready. So I think that as a society, I think we're getting more comfortable with the idea that, you know, people are on these enhancers. There's obviously quite a few groups that are very against it still.
Very strong.
You know, and obviously, right? Because it's an extra risk that they don't see the purpose for. So just because these groups don't see the purpose doesn't mean that as an athlete, you know, that group doesn't see it. So I think with it being more acceptable, because we are after that bigger, stronger, faster athlete, more people are going to get into it, and as that happens, we're going to get more issues, right? And then, but if they're going into it with the right mindset, the right background, and the right, you know, preparation, I think that possibly some people could be saved, we'll say, right?
Yeah. This is probably one of the only sports in the world that really have zero fucking rules.
Yeah.
You can literally do whatever you want as long as you do the mandatory poses when you get on stage.
Can't do a full moon on stage, though.
Exactly. Besides the on-stage rules, you can get there almost any way you decide to go.
Absolutely.
And that's scary. It's awesome. Yes. It's scary. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
But, I mean, are guys just saying, well, shit, if 200 was good, then 500 should be better.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that, you know. And, yes, you absolutely do it. But there's been not just old guys dying. I mean, we're talking guys in their 30s dying.
Yeah.
Guys in their 20s dying. From what?
Yep.
I mean, is it duration when you've only been doing it for 10 years? Or was it quantity at that point?
Well,
was it what type are you using?
Yeah.
I mean, all of those are factors. It's not just one thing.
Well, in that,
I don't want to drop names, but we're just talking in general.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, if you follow any sort of these strength sports, you kind of know who we're talking about. But it can be duration for the big dudes. It could be the size of the big dude that just eventually kills him. It could be the quality. It could be the quantity in a short amount of time.
And that's what I was going to say. I think that duration, you know, is an argument for maybe a steady state base, right?
I guess that's how I approach my life,
Once you triple it,
yeah.
Once you triple that, well, that duration that it's going to take to blow that gasket is a little shorter.
Yeah, you were given X amount of years in your life,
Yeah.
and when you use anything, it starts to shorten them.
Yep.
If you use more, it's going to rapidly shorten it off more.
So, being smart about it, I think, is the...
As smart as you can be. At least follow the research. We'll leave the link below. Follow the dude. Research as much of the information he gives you before you even make a decision.
Yeah.
And don't be forced into it. Don't listen to the bros at the gym. They do not know what they're talking about 99% of the time. I've been in there. I've listened to the talks. But you know what? When people go do this, it's freaking cool. But it's your life, man.
Yep.
And if you have responsibilities, you got to think about that as well. You know what I mean?
You got to weigh that risk.
YOLO. Well,
no,
yeah, but YOLO at 24, then you die at 28. You didn't live much,
right?
You know.
Yeah. No, that reminds me of years ago. I don't know, Ziz, right? He was a aesthetics bodybuilder, and he was young. He was in his mid-20s, I think. But he was a huge fan of clenbuterol, you know, which isn't even considered like a hard, you know, enhancer, right? Died in a sauna, you know, stayed lean year round, did it for years, you know, but that was how he stayed lean, was, you know, a ton of clen. So,
A lot of hard work on the heart.
Yeah, but there's some people that could do probably that same dose for that long
Genetics.
and be fine,
Yeah,
right?
genetics.
So just because it didn't happen to one doesn't mean it's not going to happen to you. Just because it did happen to one, doesn't mean it will, right? So
that's where I think you have to start with that. Train, blood work, figure your body out, and that doesn't take a year. That takes many years.
Yeah, and as you go, that blood work is going to be important, right?
The blood work
as you're trying different.
The blood work will change as you grow without substances.
Right.
So how does your body naturally feel at 230 pounds before you get on stuff, How does your body feel at 200 pounds? I think, what is the average size individual?
I think it used to be 185.
I think it's closer to 200 now.
Yeah.
But crap, man, we sit almost 100 pounds bigger than that most of the year. 70 to 100 pounds bigger than that most of the year. That's got to have a play. But you know what? We talk about all these guys that have passed recently in the past 13 months, 14 months. But man, I've been following bodybuilding in the 90s.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those dudes that still ain't here with us.
Right.
So there's,
Or their quality of life isn't.
Or their quality of life took a
be.
shit on them,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is a personal decision 100%. You must do your research. You must be aware of what you're freaking doing.
And if you're against it, don't pass judgment and be so hell-bent that it must be that, right?
Right.
I think that's what bothers me the most about it is that people are just so quick to discount, this person's legacy or their life or whatever on one thing.
Yeah, and that's not just with bodybuilding. That's with any sport.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to pass judgment.
Absolutely.
As I've gotten older, and most recently, I've just noticed myself, like, man, I don't know that dude's story or that gal's story. Why does she look like that? Why does she do that?
Yeah. I find myself doing that a lot more these days, too.
Yeah, it's like, in the past, you'd be like, oh, that person's blah, blah, blah. And now you're like,
well, I don't know.
I'll have a conversation with them. And I'll see what's going on here.
Let me find out before I pass the judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then some people are just pieces of shit. So
yeah
we get that too. But yeah, I don't know. Love the sport. Love everything around it. I feel great. But just because you feel great doesn't mean you are great. So you just got to make sure you're crossing your I's and dotting your T's.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah. No. I think that it's an important topic.
Yeah.
Especially with the climate these days, around the sports.
And all the young people being exposed to it.
Yes. Because of that social media, the bros in the gym, there's more of them, that are the street doctors that think they know what's going on. Number one, just be smart, be safe about it.
Yeah.
I think do your research. Take all the precautions that you can,
and learn.
Life
man.
is that journey,
just
right?
Learn first. I'll put a couple links at the bottom. The other one that came to mind, he's a fellow bodybuilder, 212 bodybuilder, John Jewett. The dude's a nerd when it comes to studying about gear and all the profiles. He's got a university program that he has out there that I've studied and I'm working on. It's outstanding. Nice. I mean, the dude just factual, studied information about every compound.
And that's the important part, right? The facts.
The factual
True
information on every compound
Yeah.
and how it works and how you can kind of put it into and why certain esters are better than others. So we'll put those links at the bottom. Make sure you subscribe and tell your friends, like the video, ding that bell, keep the notifications coming.
And if you guys got a topic that you want us to talk about, put it in the comments or
yeah, please do. Put it in the comments
over.
and we'll get at it.
Cool.
We'll see you next week.